What is going on, guys? I am Paul Ryan, your host of the ATB Fantasy Show. If you're new to the show, thank you for joining us, and to our regular listeners, welcome back. With me tonight is co-host Mr. Pigskin Papers, Dave Hartman. Dave, how are you?
I'm doing well, Paul. How are you doing? When last we spoke, the Cowboys were still in the playoffs. I see you got your Cowboy hat on. That was a good game. How are you doing post the end of the Cowboys season?
I'm still coping, Dave. I mean, I think about that game, and the more I think about it, it's a game that was so winnable. If Dak is just half as good as he normally is on any given day, I mean, I think we win that game. But it's a tough loss. But I'm glad that we were in that position. It just stings to know that that's a game that we probably should have won when you think about how well our defense played.
Defense played great. I know Dan Quinn knows Kyle Shanahan's system well.
Yeah,
They coached together down in Atlanta a long time ago, and their defense was there. I mean, they kept him in the game the whole way. Brock Purdy for the first time didn't have a touchdown pass. They only scored 19 points. They only got field goals off the two interceptions in the first half. And we'll get into this later in the show, but one thing that stuck out to me was just how similar the end of the Cowboys season was to a year ago.
yeah.
Same team, San Francisco,
Mm-hmm.
in the playoffs, one score game. Cowboys, get a possession with a couple minutes left, go 3 and out, but get a stop, use their timeouts, get the ball back, and again can't mount a drive or enough of a drive. And then run a ridiculous play on the last play of the season. It was like watching the same thing again. I don't know if you felt that way, like you were watching history repeat itself, but it really just seemed like their season ended exactly the way it ended the year before.
This year's end of the last play of the game was a lot more ridiculous than
Yeah.
last year's. I'll tell
Yeah.
you
I
that.
mean, Zeke didn't need to get blown up like that. They left him out there and let a linebacker get a 5-yard running start to knock him on his butt. That was a little the whole formation was weird. I mean, it was really the two plays before that though, with Schultz not getting out of bounds with forward momentum, and then Schultz getting out of bounds without getting 2 feet down. And I mean, it was a long shot anyway that they were going to score at the very end there, but I think those two plays made it next to impossible.
Yeah, it was. I mean, the last year's ending, I felt like we actually had a real chance. I mean, of course, the clock, not being on our side and everything, we know how that unfolded. But the I never really thought that we were going to do anything with this last drive of Sunday's game. To be honest with you.
Yeah, that's fair. Well, I didn't mean to hijack this pod with Cowboy talk. I know you have a whole podcast over the Cowboys, so let's get started.
Well, hey, I understand you're rubbing in my Cowboys loss to
No,
cope
not
with
at
your
all,
Giants
not at all.
loss.
I just, look, I mean, my team's the Dolphins. My second team is the Giants. They're both gone. So now we root, now we watch football with a different lens because we aren't conflicted by our own biases as fans of one of the teams.
Absolutely. Well, Dave, before we get into our discussion tonight, let the people know where they can find you on Twitter, sir.
Great. Thank you, Paul. You can find me at Pigskin Papers. Both of the P's are capitalized. And my blog, my website is thepigskinpapers.com. I've got a column up right now, which is a little bit of a recap of the divisional round, but mostly a preview of what's coming this week with the two conference championship games. Very similar to the format we're going to follow on tonight's show, talking part of the time about what just happened last week and then looking ahead at what we can expect this week. And Paul, where
I'm
can
excited.
you on Twitter? Sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt.
No, you're fine. I was going to say I'm excited to read your article just because I feel like you're going to have some interesting stats and storylines to look out for on the game and everything. So when I was doing research, I'm like, Dave's going to have some cool little tidbits in this article. I'm sure
A few,
about
a
these
few.
games.
There's a few this week.
Yeah. Well, guys, I'm Paul Ryan. You can find me on Twitter at Paul_Ryan15. Dave, let's talk some football. And, we're on to the championship round. But when you look at the divisional round compared to the wild card round, did you think, which round did you think was better?
I thought the wild card round was better. I mean, first of all, there were 6 games instead of 4, so you have a better chance of getting some good games. If you look at the divisional round, 2 of the games really weren't close. I mean, I know
Yeah.
the Bills were never completely out of it, but the Bengals kind of dominated that game from the get-go.
Mm-hmm.
Built a 14-0 lead quickly in the first quarter. The Eagles steamrolled the Giants. Um, none of the comebacks succeeded. Patrick Mahomes got hurt, left the game for a little while. Um, and he's the presumptive MVP this year. So, that the Dallas San Francisco game was the best game and the most competitive for the longest amount of time. I know Jacksonville ended up losing by a touchdown, but even, once Mahomes was back in that game, it kind of didn't really feel like the Jaguars had that much of a realistic chance of winning that game. So, you think back to the wild card round to answer your question. We had that crazy comeback in the Jacksonville Charger game. Um, the two AFC division games that kind of went to the wire,
Yeah.
um, with the Dolphins and the Bills. Two near upsets, the Ravens and the Bengals with the big fumble 6 at the end of that game. The Giants Vikings game was an exciting game that went back and forth and kind of came down right to the Vikings' last possession. So I just think the wild card round had better games. And if you think about this division round and you compare it to last year, there's obviously no comparison. Last year had the three games decided by 3 points, and then the crazy Buffalo Kansas City game with all the points in the last 2 minutes, the Chiefs tying it in 13 seconds, the game going to overtime. And then Kansas City ultimately prevailing over the Bills. So well, what did you think? It was good football. I was happy to watch the games this weekend, but it ended up not being, the games other than the last one ended up not being all that interesting.
Yeah. Outside of the Cowboys game, none of these games really had me on the edge of my seat like the ones in the wild card round. I'm right there with you. I felt like the wild card round was a lot better. The quality of the games was better. I was kind of surprised. I mean, not kind of surprised. I was very surprised about how Cincinnati just kind of dominated Buffalo.
Yeah, I wrote about that in my column this week. That was, for me, the biggest surprise of the week was just how easily they beat the Bills and how they, if you would have told me before the season, all right, they're going to play in Buffalo, it's going to be snowing, you know, who's winning that game, I would have picked the Bills. But Cincinnati was the tougher team. They were the more physical team. And they just kind of beat them in all 3 phases of the game. I mentioned the Giants before, and we've talked about them a lot on this show the last couple of weeks, and we praised them a lot last week
Yeah.
for their big win over the Vikings. But if you look back at their last 10 games, and I know one of them they didn't play their starters against the Eagles, so maybe you can throw that one out. But they get blown out in their second playoff game. They're 3-6-1 over their last 10 games.
Oh
Do you
man.
do you think this was a team that deserved to be in the playoffs?
Dave, I hate to use recency bias to make, a judgment call, if you will, but their performance would say no. I mean, you look at the Eagles and they were a much superior team, and you think about the talent on both sides of the ball for Philadelphia compared to the Giants. It's really not very close. The Giants were a fun team to root for this year because you think about Brian Dable and Daniel Jones, Saquon Barkley. All those guys are easy to root for. But then after that, it's like, what else did they have? So, they earned their way to the playoffs. They had a good first half of the season. You mentioned the record of the last 10 games, which is very surprising. But they earned their shot. However, I was looking at some of the teams that didn't make the playoffs, and for me, if I would have picked a different team to be there, I think the Lions are the better overall team, and that's a team I would have preferred to see in the playoffs.
Well, that's fair. I mean, the 3-6-1 for the Giants includes a loss to the Lions in the Meadowlands. So,
Yeah.
the Lions certainly were a deserving team. They Oh, there I am. That was
There you
weird.
are, Dave.
Lost my video there for a second. But I look at it this way. They no team this year did more with less, and they won a playoff game. So to me, the
Yeah.
fact that they won a playoff game means they were a deserving playoff team. I think with the NFL having expanded the playoffs to 7 teams per conference, you're talking about almost half the league is making the playoffs, 14 out of 32 teams. So
Hmm.
the last couple teams in each conference, I mean, to me, the Bucks were the worst team that made the playoffs this year.
That's
And
fair.
it showed in their game against the Cowboys, but they were a division winner. So, they get in automatically. After that, probably the Dolphins just without a quarterback going into the playoffs. The Giants, the Seahawks. There were 3 or 4 teams this year that were a cut below, the most talented teams in the playoffs. And I think we're going to see that every year as long as the NFL, sticks to 14 out of 32 teams getting in.
Right, right.
It's just a deep playoff field, and so it gets thinned out. So yeah, I was happy to see the Giants make the playoffs, and again, they won
Hmm.
the playoff game. So they were playing with house money. I don't like seeing them get embarrassed like they did.
Right.
That was the biggest margin of victory in a playoff game between division teams in the Super Bowl era. I was surprised to see that
Oh,
because it was
wow.
31 points, but that's the biggest, division games. We saw it last week. They tend to be close in the playoffs, even when it looks like a mismatch like Buffalo and Miami. It's just teams that know each other well. They're playing each other for the third time, and it's unusual to see a blowout like that.
It'll be interesting to see what the Giants do in the offseason because they do have pieces to build around, and I think they're about a receiver away, and a piece or two on defense from being a team that deserves some respect.
Yeah, and they have big decisions this offseason. We talked about this on the show, I think 2 weeks ago. Daniel Jones is a potential free agent. Saquon Barkley is a potential free agent. They have the franchise tag. They'll use it on one of them, I would think. I think they'll sign Jones. I don't think they want to give Barkley, a long-term deal. I think what Dallas did with Zeke is unusual. I don't see a lot of teams giving running backs a big, long second contract with a lot of guaranteed money.
Yeah,
And I don't think the Giants want to do that with Barkley. So I think he's a pretty good candidate to be franchise tagged, but we'll see. It's a long off season.
it is. Yeah, another team, Dave, that stuck into the playoffs was the Jacksonville Jaguars. And you look at Trevor Lawrence, the year that he had. Is he looking like he'll be the next elite quarterback?
Certainly could be. He's an interesting case because he was the clear number 1 pick, and people were saying he was the best QB prospect since Andrew Luck, and that's a lot of pressure to put on a young player. He won a college national championship, so everyone knew who he was. It
Yeah,
seemed like he was there for like as a 4-year starter. Like Clemson was on TV a lot, and the whole country kind of knew who Trevor Lawrence was. And there were a lot of expectations. And then his first season gets kind of wrecked by the whole Urban Meyer disaster. Doesn't get good coaching. He's on a terrible team. They went out and spent a lot of money. I think, people made fun of them for the Christian Kirk contract, and Christian Kirk was great this year, up including last week. And he's not necessarily a number 1, but he's a really good slot receiver, and I think he helped Lawrence a lot. I think Evan Ingram did too. I think Lawrence still has a way to go before I'm putting him in the same sentence as Mahomes and Burrow and Josh Allen and even Justin Herbert. But he showed a lot
Oh.
of development this year. I mean, I just think he
Uh-huh.
still turns the ball over too much. And he hasn't won a lot of games. But I think it's coming. Uh, I don't know that he'll be as good as, the quarterbacks who were as heralded as him, like Andrew Luck or Peyton Manning. He still doesn't seem to me to be like he's there yet. Uh, but this season was certainly a step in the right direction, and especially getting some playoff experience. He got to play 2 playoff games, and that's huge. That, you kind of need that. I mean, obviously he played big games in college. Um, but I certainly think he could be an elite franchise type quarterback. That's the expectation. I just don't think he's there yet. What do you think?
Yeah, again, recency bias, Dave, but I'm ready to put him right up there with Joe Burrow and Patrick Mahomes. And I personally, I have him over Justin Herbert. I'm not sure what you think about that, but Doug Peterson deserves a lot of credit for what he did this year. But yeah, but Trevor Lawrence, he is a stud, and I feel like he showed us why he was the number 1 overall pick this year, and I think he's only going to get better.
Well, it's funny. I'm just thinking about this. One QB we haven't mentioned, who's a third-year player, is Jalen Hurts. And right now, I'd rather face either Lawrence or Herbert than Jalen Hurts. Maybe part of it is the offense he's on and the weapons he has, and just the way
Yeah.
Philly has played all year. And Hurts came into the league with more questions about his accuracy and his,
Mhm.
just his general ability to throw. But we'll see how he does this week. But he's another young quarterback that I think has entered the conversation of, is this the next great one? Certainly he's got a good chance to get to a Super Bowl. So we'll see. Another team, we talked a little earlier, and still kind of looking back at last week, we talked a little earlier about the Bills and how thoroughly they got beaten. This is a team that 2 years ago, they lose in the AFC Championship game. Then last year they lose in that crazy AFC division round game, a game they probably should have won. And then this year they kind of get beat soundly in the AFC divisional round. So they're kind of moving in the wrong direction.
Yeah.
For a team that very much 2 years ago looked like they were ascending and they were the next great team. The only thing that was really different from last year to this year, they added Von Miller, but he got hurt. Brian Daboll left as their offensive coordinator, and maybe that mattered more than we thought. But when you look at the Bills, Paul, what do you think they need to do to kind of get over this hump and get up there with, the Bengals and the Chiefs, who for the second straight year are playing in the AFC Championship game with the Bills at home watching?
Well, Dave, the easy answer would be to stop playing good teams in the playoffs. Stop running into Patrick Mahomes and Joe Burrow, of course.
Yeah, that's
Go ahead.
fair.
I'm sorry.
No,
Yeah.
it's a good comment. I'm nodding my head. Keep going.
Yeah, but the real answer is, I would say take a little bit of pressure off Allen, maybe, utilize the run game a little bit more to take some pressure off Allen, or just continue to build that defense. I mean, we saw this year they were already a top 10 pass defense and top 5 run defense. It's just kind of, what's the saying? It's better to be lucky than good sometimes. And they've just had bad luck in the playoffs, honestly.
Yeah, one thing that stood out to me this weekend was, a lot of the talk going into the game, and the reason I picked the Bills that sort of broke the tie for me was the Bengals being without 3 offensive linemen from an offensive line that wasn't great to begin with. That was sort of the main thing they changed from last year when, Burrow, his first 2 seasons, got sacked so many times. I think part of it is Burrow has gotten better at getting the ball out, more quickly
Quicker.
and
Yeah.
making faster decisions and faster processing. But the Bills really, they only had 1 sack in this game. And again, I don't want to just keep talking about Von Miller, but their defense really hasn't been the same since he got hurt. And the rest of the guys, Gregory Rousseau is developing into a pretty good young player.
Yeah.
But they just didn't put pressure on Burrow. He had time and he picked them apart, which is what he's going to do when he has time. He's got really good weapons and he's got a really good arm and he can make every throw. So I don't know. I mean, maybe they get Miller back fully healthy next year and they have more of a pass rush. Maybe their secondary can stay healthier. And I'm not just talking about DeMar Hamlin. I mean, he was getting big minutes because Poyer was hurt. They had a lot of injuries on the back end this year. So, but I think maybe they're missing a little bit of toughness. I don't know. Like the Bengals really pushed them around. They looked like the tougher and more physical team.
Yeah.
The Bills are not a particularly big team. And the last thing I'll say is I was sort of thinking this was going to be Gabe Davis's year, that like he was going to really emerge as a solid number 2 opposite Stephon Diggs. And he showed flashes, but he was pretty inconsistent. He had a lot of games with 2 or 3 catches, didn't have a ton of catches on the season. Isaiah McKenzie really didn't, he got hurt. Jamison Crowder got hurt. They finally had to bring back Beasley. They didn't have a lot of continuity on that offense. I also think Josh Allen's elbow was maybe a little more of an issue than anyone said. But part of what you said is the answer. They're just in a loaded conference with 2 teams that right now are just a little bit better than them, and they run into them in the playoffs.
Yeah, definitely. And I like your answer though about the toughness, because they were kind of getting bullied there in the run game by the Bengals. So you think about Buffalo,
172 yards of rushing. That's a lot.
Yeah, without 3 starting offensive linemen.
Yeah, and 30 first downs.
Man.
Yeah.
I believe you're passing the baton to me here, Dave. This question pains me to ask, but you look at Dallas and McCarthy and their back-to-back years of the way they kind of lead the playoffs. Of course, back-to-back years of 12 regular season wins. But when you look at the combination of McCarthy and Dak, is that a championship winning duo, you think? Can Dallas win a championship with those 2?
Well, they haven't so far, and Dak has only won, I think, now 2 playoff games in his career. But I'm going to say they can, for a couple reasons. One, I mean, it's not good that they're in the same division with Philadelphia, because I think Philadelphia now is going to be a really good team for the next couple years, and Jalen Hurts is a lot younger than Dak is, and Dak regressed this year with the turnovers, and that's something he needs to work on. But I think Dallas's defense is they're young, and they're one of the 3 or 4 best defenses in the NFL, and you saw it last week. I mean, holding the 49ers to 19 points on the road, with the weapons that they have. They're the first team that really kind of made Brock Purdy look a little bit more like a rookie. I know he didn't turn the ball over, but he also didn't do that much. I also think that the 49ers kind of looked at that game, the way it was playing out, and just said, we're going to play conservatively. We're going to let our defense, we have the better kicker. They're scared to even use their kicker. Our kicker's never missed a playoff kick, and we're just going to kind of grind out a low scoring win here. And we can win that way, or we can win by scoring points. But, I'm not a big Mike McCarthy fan. I wasn't when he was in Green Bay. I know he won a Super Bowl there, but, the Cowboys were a good team this year. And I think that their defense, with Parsons and some of the other really good young players they have on that defense, I think they can win. I think they can win a Super Bowl with this combination, but a lot's going to have to go right for that to happen. So hopefully that's the answer you wanted to hear. What do you think from your standpoint?
I absolutely think they can. They've got a championship caliber defense. I think we've seen from Dak. I know you mentioned the interceptions this year. It's fair to say that he regressed in that aspect. But McCarthy, I mean, he's proven to be a winner. I know he left Green Bay kind of, on a bad note, but of course, usually that's when coaches do leave teams, is when they've kind of their time has ended. But when you look at what he's done in Dallas, his first year with the worst defense in the NFL, one of the worst in history, he still found a way, and he still found a way without his starting quarterback to have the team in a position to make the playoffs all the way to week, I believe it was 17. We lost
Yeah.
to the Giants, I believe was that game that we were eliminated. But and then you look at back-to-back 12-win seasons. I mean, that says a lot about your head coach. If Dallas, they built the defense through the draft the last 2 years. Now it's time to add some pieces to the offense. When you look at about how they approached this offseason, trading away Amari, letting Cedric Wilson walk. I don't think they've done Dak any favors the last 2 years. They've got to bring in some help for him, I think.
Yeah, that's fair. And one thing I forgot to mention, but when I was talking about how San Francisco kind of approached that game as it was going on, I think Tony Pollard leaving the game just gave San Francisco more reason to just say, we'll play conservatively on offense. We'll play for field goals. We don't want Purdy we don't want to put the game in his hands and let him make mistakes against this defense. He was getting pressured a lot. Parsons was everywhere. I mean, like, you looked up and he was like jumping over someone, or he was just everywhere in that game. And I think when Pollard went out, I think the 49ers realized CeeDee Lamb was like the only guy who could beat him on that offense.
Yeah.
And Lamb had a good game. He had 100 yards and a bunch of catches. But that made a difference in that game too. And obviously Pollard's injury was more than Mahomes' injury. I mean, it's more than a high ankle sprain. He broke his ankle. So we'll see him, thankfully he's got plenty of time to heal up. And I think next year you'll see him take even a bigger lion's share of the running back work from Zeke. Let Zeke kind of continue to be the short yardage guy that pounded between the tackles on some of the early downs. But Pollard is just a much more explosive player and gives that offense a little more of that dimension that it needs. So anyway, it was a tough loss, but I thought they acquitted themselves pretty well, and we've talked about it a little bit already. I think that they hung in there tough with one of the best teams in the NFL. So I think we've pretty much recapped the division round and said what there is to say about it. Now we look ahead to the conference championships, and I know you had said last week that this is your favorite week of the playoffs. So we've got 3 of the teams that are in the conference championships are the same teams as last year. We got a rematch of the Chiefs and the Bengals. The 49ers are back. They're not playing the Rams this time. They're playing the Eagles. From your perspective, Paul, seeing 3 of the 4 teams be the same, do you like that, or would you rather see some different teams, some fresh faces versus last year?
Well, I definitely want my Cowboys to be one of those teams. So, yeah, I'd like to see some new teams in there, Dave. But, as long as the best teams are there, that's really what matters to me. Of course, I'd like to see some new teams make it. But when you have teams like Cincinnati, Kansas City, and San Francisco with the talent on their rosters, it's hard to complain because it's good football. You know what I mean? It's exciting football. I'd like to see some new blood from time to time, but the cream always rises to the top, and that's why when you see some of the same teams being in that position, there's a reason why.
Yeah, that's fair, and I also still feel like the Bengals are new. Burrow's only in his 3rd year. Zach Taylor's a really young coach. Jamar Chase is only in his 2nd year. A lot of their players, it's not like, we had Tom Brady in conference championships like 9 out of 10 years or something from like 2011 to 2021 or 2020, the last time he was in it. And, that started to feel to me like every year was the same because the Patriots were always there. And then he went to the Bucs and they were in the conference championships his first year with Tampa. So for me, I know the Chiefs are here for the 5th straight year. So that feels a little bit like they're just always there. But the Eagles are new. I mean, I know
Exactly.
they were there 5 or 6 years ago with a completely different team and a different coach. Hurts is a very young player. Brock Purdy's a rookie. I mean, I know the 49ers were there last year, but they didn't have Christian McCaffrey. They didn't have Brock Purdy as their leader of the offense. So I'm good with this. This doesn't feel repetitive or boring to me. Not yet, anyway.
Yeah, and it's three of the same teams, but you got to think about Eagles this year, Rams last year, Tampa Bay the year before that, Packers. I mean, I feel like there's been just enough of a mix to make it interesting, but at the same time, I mean, as loaded as the AFC is, there's kind of the big dogs are always going to come out.
Yeah, I think that's right.
When you look at the championship games, this championship round, Dave, are these teams the best teams in the NFL?
Without question, I will say 100%. These are the four best teams. The statistics certainly back it up. I mean, if you look at their records, none of them has more than 4 losses, right? Their combined record is 59-14. The 49ers have won 11 in a row. The Bengals have won 10 in a row. The Chiefs have won 6 in a row. The Eagles with Jalen Hurts as their quarterback are 15-1. These teams, if you look at like where they rank in DVOA and advanced metrics, or you look at traditional metrics of, offense and defense rankings, these teams are near the top. Each one of them is number 1 or 2 in either offense or defense, except for maybe the Bengals, but they're solid, very solid in both, in really all phases of the game. They all even have good kickers. They're all well coached. I don't think there's any question the cream has risen to the top, as you said before. Mm-hmm. And, we saw it this week. These 4 teams, all played good teams and beat them soundly. I mean, the one game that was the closest, I guess, was that Cowboy game, but that was still a touchdown. And the Chiefs were a touchdown. And that was with Patrick Mahomes missing part of the game. So I think we've got the best teams. And that's really, as a fan, all you can ask for. You look at the betting lines this week, and both games are less than a field goal. Both over-unders are right around 46. Like, the bookmakers certainly think this is going to be, 2 very close, not too high scoring, but also not too low scoring games. What do you think? What do you think about the 2 matchups we've got this week?
Oh, I mean, I'm excited. You'll hear how excited I am in my bold call later on. But yeah, I love these matchups. I think they're perfectly balanced. I think the way that these teams play, when you think about their opponents and everything, I think it makes for an interesting games as well.
Okay, we agree on all of that, and I think we're both feeling like the right teams are there, which I think is important. Now we've talked about how the Chiefs and the Bengals are not only facing each other, for the second time, but in a conference championship game, but they've played each other 3 times in the last 12 months or 12 and a half months. The Bengals have won all 3, and they've won all 3 by exactly 3 points. So, it's pretty consistent. In fact, the last 2 times they played, which was the game in week 13 this year and the game in the AFC Championship last year, which went to overtime, where the Bengals came back, the score was even the same. It was 27-24. So, Brady versus Mahomes is kind of becoming this marquee matchup. Yeah. Are you getting like Manning versus Brady vibes at this point? And by Manning, I know Eli played Tom Brady twice. Really more Peyton Manning, who was, all those years on the Colts, where the Colts and the Patriots were clearly the 2 best teams in the AFC. Yeah. And met in the playoffs a whole bunch of times. Are you getting those kind of vibes from these 2?
Somewhat. You mentioned how many times Brady and Manning played. They played 17, and Manning actually has the winning record overall, which I was surprised by. But four of those games, or excuse me, five of the games that 5 of those 17 games came in the AFC Championship game. Here we are with back-to-back seasons of Burrow versus Mahomes. I do kind of get a Brady versus Manning vibe from this. How about you, Dave?
Yeah, a little bit. I think for me, the difference is the number of other quarterbacks that are part of this conversation.
Okay.
Josh Allen in the last couple years, he's faced Mahomes twice in the playoffs. He's
Yeah.
faced, now he's faced Burrow in the playoffs, and he's right there with those guys. Even though that he hasn't gotten to an AFC championship game the last 2 years. You got Herbert, you got Lawrence, who we talked about earlier. Maybe Deshaun Watson again. He was sort of in the conversation 2 years ago as, among the best QBs in the AFC. So, certainly these Burrow Mahomes matchups have all been really good. And part of that is just their teams are really good. So it's not just, we tend to oversimplify it like it's Brady versus Manning or Mahomes versus Burrow, but football is a team game. And,
Right.
the quarterback can only do so much and can't win or lose the game all by himself. But it's
Very true.
certainly, I think Mahomes is 27 and Burrow's either 25 or 26. So, it could be this way for a while. Like for the next 5 to 10 years, if these guys want to win Super Bowls, they're going to have to get by each other. Now, they might
Right.
not play each other every year because they could get eliminated by someone else. They could miss the playoffs one year, or they could be hurt, whatever. But this isn't the last year that we'll see them play each other in the playoffs by a long stretch. So I think it's good for the game. They're two of the coolest sort of players in the league. They you see a lot
Right.
of jerseys everywhere. They're both really popular players. They're both, Mahomes has won a Super Bowl, so he's got that. But right now, Burrow has the Bengals have the Chiefs' number right now. We'll see if that continues this week.
Yeah, absolutely. And another quarterback that I don't know, say what you will, probably doesn't deserve to be here, but he's earned his way here is Brock Purdy. You look at what he's done, Dave. Is it time to start believing in Brock Purdy?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's been time to start believing in him for a little while, and sort of at this point, like nothing's off the table with him. If he wins a Super Bowl, he's, without ever losing a game in his rookie season, that could happen. They're 2 games away and they have a really, really good team with an amazing defense and, one of the best collection of skill position players we've seen in the last couple years. I talked earlier about how Shanahan kind of managed the game against the Cowboys, and that was the best defense Brock Purdy had faced, and he was at home. Now he faces a defense. I don't know if they're better than the Cowboys, but they certainly are the best at getting after the passer. The Eagles had 70 sacks this year. They had 5 more this past week, putting Daniel Jones on the ground a bunch of times and pressuring him when they didn't sack him. And this game's in Philadelphia, with a very rowdy and hostile crowd. And this is going to be a whole other level for Brock Purdy to deal with. So I'm definitely taking him seriously. And, obviously the Niners have a good chance of winning this game. But I think this is going to be the week where maybe the rubber meets the road a little bit for him. This past week was the first time he hasn't thrown a touchdown. In fact, it was the first time he hasn't thrown 2 touchdowns in any of the 7 games he started, plus the one he came in against the Dolphins when Jimmy G got hurt. And, he didn't turn the ball over. And again, that's what they're asking him not to do, but he's going to have to take more chances this week. They're going to have to score more than 19 points, which is what they scored against Dallas. They're going to have to try to get touchdowns and not settle for field goals. I don't think they can beat the Eagles in a very low scoring game. So I'm really interested to see. That's one of the things I'm most interested to see this week is how the 49ers approach this game from an offensive standpoint. Do they give Purdy, he made a lot of good throws in the weeks before the playoffs, but that was against a lot of mediocre defenses. And even in the first round
Right.
of the playoffs against Seattle, which is a mediocre defense and a very young defense.
Mm-hmm.
Now for the second straight week, he's facing a big boy defense. And so, I think this is going to be his biggest test yet. And I'm worried he's not going to pass it or not going to pass it enough to allow his team to win. Despite all the poise he's shown, and he really hasn't been flappable, he hasn't blinked yet. But I think this weekend might be the time where that happens. What is your take on Brock Purdy and the 49er offense in this game against the Eagles?
Yeah, Dave, like you were saying, talking about the defenses he's faced, what he's done as the prospect that he was coming in, and how he's handled it all, is you can't take that away from him. He's been fantastic. But like you said, we're facing these big boy defenses. Last week he did look rattled against that Cowboys defense. You mentioned he didn't throw a touchdown pass for the first time, or multiple touchdown passes for the first time. So I want to see how he looks when the stakes are even higher against a team that's even better. But yeah, I mean, it's getting very close to where you start asking, okay, is he really going to be the franchise quarterback for the 49ers, and what's going to happen with Trey Lance, which is a fun discussion for the offseason.
It is. And I'll tell you something. I mean, if he goes in there and beats the Eagles and puts up, big numbers, I've been so impressed by him already, and everything you said, I agree with. I mean, he's shown tremendous poise he's a third string quarterback, right? Like the 49ers are in the conference final. Last year, they were in the conference final with, at the time, their first string quarterback in Jimmy Garoppolo. And this was supposed to be the year of Trey Lance, and Lance gets hurt. So Jimmy G, who wasn't even in camp for half of, because they were trying to trade him. Then they, it's sort of awkward, but they turn it over to Jimmy G. They keep winning. And then he gets hurt, and they bring in someone no one has ever heard of. The controversy there this year was going to be Lance or Jimmy G. And here it is, the last pick in the draft has them in the conference championship. So it's quite the story. And we'll see if the story has one more chapter after this week. That's we'll talk about that when we get back on the air the week before the Super Bowl. So we'll see about that. But it's sort of an interesting situation that the 49ers were in, and it kind of it sort of begs the question: is Kyle Shanahan sort of reinventing the wheel and showing us that maybe quarterbacks don't matter that much?
In his time with San Francisco, we've seen him trot out.
I'm sorry, I'm going to rephrase that. Not that they don't matter that much, but that in the right system with the right weapons, you can win with a bunch of different types of quarterbacks.
Yeah.
That you can plug someone into that system who has basic competency and poise and an ability to stand in, and they can succeed.
Yeah, I mean, during his time in San Francisco, I mean, I think he's had 4 or 5 different starting quarterbacks in just in the 4 or 5 years that he's been there, because Jimmy Garoppolo has had an injury history, and we've seen some guys in that system put up big numbers. I mean, we've yet to see Trey Lance really get his opportunity to do that. But you think about Brock Purdy, he had Brian Hoyer one year. He had a couple of other guys.
Nick Mullins, huge numbers like 3 years ago.
Put up big numbers too. And then we even saw CJ Beathard win a couple of games and put up big numbers too. So, I mean, yeah, I feel like he's been doing it for a little while, and he's starting to show that, like you said, the right system with even just a competent quarterback is just as important as having a very talented quarterback. What do you think,
Yeah.
Dave?
Yeah. No, look, I think if there's one team, so the answer to the question, I think generally is no, because I don't think there are a lot of teams like San Francisco that have a system that is taught that way, and they obviously drafted Brock Purdy for a reason. It was the last pick in the draft. Fine. He was a seventh rounder, but obviously they saw something in him that they thought he could work in this system if they ever needed him to. And
Mm-hmm.
obviously they didn't draft him thinking he'd be playing this year. Um, they drafted him thinking he'd be a backup and probably a career backup. That's what seventh rounders are, if they even make it as career backups. So I don't think there are a lot of, you saw this year a lot of teams, there were a lot of QB injuries, and a bunch of teams ended up starting second and even third stringers.
Yeah.
You know, guys like Thompson in Miami, and there were a whole bunch of other ones. Teams that had second and third stringers out there, and most of them struggled. None of
Mm-hmm.
them went undefeated over 6+ games like Brock Purdy has. I think the 49ers system and the skill position players they have, the offensive line they have, plus the blocking of their tight ends, is a unique situation. And I don't think there are a lot of situations where what has happened in San Francisco this year could happen. And
Mm-hmm.
it
Agreed.
reminds me a little bit of the year where, and this may be a little before your time as a football fan, but the very first year that the Patriots won the Super Bowl, when Drew Bledsoe, he was their starting quarterback. He was, a number one overall pick, or number two. He was either number one or number two. It was his team. They took Brady with a 6th-round pick. He didn't play as a rookie. He carried a clipboard. He was the backup. And Mo Lewis of the Jets hits, big hit on Bledsoe, knocks him out for the season. Brady comes in, and it was a system. It was the Patriots system. It's very different than the Shanahan system. But, Brady was in there, made the throws he needed to make, but he didn't put up big passing numbers those first couple of Super Bowl years. He kind of worked within the system. They ran the ball a lot. They had a great defense, and he was really good, but he wasn't the Tom Brady that he would become later in his career, that would win games by, throwing for 400 yards when needed.
Yeah.
And this reminds me of that a little bit because, Brady won a Super Bowl. They won the Super Bowl that year with Brady's first year as a starter, coming in off an injury to the starter, and no one had ever heard of him. I mean, people who followed Michigan had heard of him because he had been the quarterback at Michigan, but he was a 6th-round pick. So no one was expecting anything from him. And this reminds me of that a little bit. I mean, there are examples, and obviously I don't think Brock Purdy's going to turn into Tom Brady. I'm not saying that. And if you look back on that, it's not surprising that Brady was able to do that because of what he became, and
Mm-hmm.
the all-time great that he became. But this just sort of is reminiscent of that a little bit for me.
Yeah, that makes sense.
Yeah, we'll see. We'll see. Shanahan, it's amazing. Like, you and I both play fantasy, and it's like if someone gets hurt and someone you've never heard of is starting for San Francisco, pick him up on the waiver wire. He's going to get you some
Yeah.
touchdowns, and he's going to be playable.
Yeah, I wish I'd picked up Brock Purdy in some of my dynasty leagues. I'll tell you that.
Yeah, well, live and learn. Pick the Shanahan.
We know Kansas City's a good football team, and you look at all the teams remaining in this championship round. Their rosters are pretty stacked, but you look at Kansas City's, and they're not as talented as we've been accustomed to. What are they the least talented team in this group before, Dave?
I'm gonna say no. And the reason I'm gonna say no, and we're 50 minutes into this podcast, and we've barely talked about what might be the biggest story of this week, which is Patrick Mahomes' ankle, right?
Yeah.
Because if he's not right, if look, he's going to play. He came back into that game with a high ankle sprain. That's a significant injury, but this is the conference championships. He's not missing this game. And if he was able to come back into that game, he's going to play this week. But so much of his game, and I'm going to answer your question. This is
fine.
a roundabout way of getting to the answer of that question. Mahomes is like an improvisational genius. We've seen him make these plays where he's running backwards this way, and then he turns the other way, and then he's running forward, and he's right up to the line of scrimmage, and there's a defender in his face, and he throws it underhanded to Travis Kelce in the end zone for a touchdown. If his ankle isn't right, and he's not really able to really move around and buy time and be creative, then I think it's going to be a difficult game for the Chiefs to win. I think if Mahomes is 80 to 90% of himself, then I think they're right in there, and they've proven against the Bengals that they're very evenly matched. The Chiefs scored the most points in the NFL this year. They had the number one ranked offense in the NFL this year. And the reason that I think they are not the least talented team in this round is a lot of it is Patrick Mahomes, because I think he's the most talented quarterback in the NFL, and he's playing the most important position in the game. But they've got good players in other places. I think the one place where they're probably, weaker than they've been in the past is at the wide receiver position, where they're missing Tyreek Hill. Right. And, Juju's a good player. Kadarius Toney is an exciting player. They haven't really figured out totally how to unleash him yet. Maybe this week will be the week where he kind of really gets an opportunity and gets a lot of touches. But their defense is better than you think. They were a borderline top defense this year. Nick Bolton's a really good player. Chris Jones is, he had the number one of all the defensive tackles in the league this year. He had the number one win rate on pass rushes. So they've got talent. I mean, all four of these teams have a lot of talent. The Chiefs have it kind of everywhere. Kind of a lot of really good players, maybe outside of Mahomes and Kelce and Chris Jones, like not that many truly great players. But I'm going to say that these four teams, the talent level is close between all four. And I think you're kind of splitting hairs if you, I think maybe the Eagles have the most talent of the four. I think when you look at their defensive line, their offensive line, like positions that are less glamorous, their secondary, I think they might have the most talent, but I think all four teams are pretty close. What do you think about the talent level of the four teams this week?
Yeah, that's, when you break it down that way, it is pretty close. Like you said, the Chiefs have some good players everywhere, just not great players everywhere. You think about, nobody can really compare to, when you think about all four teams, they don't all have Patrick Mahomes and Travis Kelce, which really is what separates Kansas City from the rest, in my opinion. That being said, you mentioned it. It was the major disadvantage for Kansas City is that wide receiver. They don't have a receiver who has 80 receptions, 1,000 receiving yards, or 5 or more touchdowns. And you look at Cincinnati, they have 2 of those receivers. Philadelphia has 2 of those receivers, and San Francisco only has 1. But still, I think as far as skill players go, I think since San Francisco probably has the best, and Kansas City would be at the bottom of the list for me.
Yeah, it's kind of interesting when you look at the Chiefs and the Bengals and kind of breaking this game down, in addition to worrying about Mahomes' injury, is what the Bengals did to them in the championship game last year. The Chiefs had that 21-3 lead, and then the Bengals scored before the half, which is always, we talked about that with that Chargers-Jaguars game, like getting that touchdown before the half, it can be huge in games where you're down big in the first half.
Right.
Kind of allows you to regroup a little bit and, kind of believe in yourselves a little bit that, hey, we're not out of this game. We just scored a touchdown. we can get a couple stops, score a couple more touchdowns, and we can get back in this thing. But the Bengals made a big adjustment in that AFC Championship game last year, and the Chiefs only scored 3 points after intermission and into the overtime. They started dropping 8 into coverage and only rushing 3. They did that on a lot of obvious passing downs, and it seemed to confuse Mahomes. This team throws downfield less. Maybe if Mecole Hardman is back this week and he and MVS can stretch the field a little bit, but Mahomes threw a lot to tight ends and running backs this year. I know he didn't really throw to his running backs last week, but I think it's going to be interesting to see whether Cincinnati, goes into that 8 deep shell a lot of times and tries to, especially if they think Mahomes can't move around that much. Maybe they come after him a little more if they think he can't move around that much, and they worry a little less about him beating them by buying extra time and then finding open guys against less of a zone. So that, to me, that's one of the things I'm really going to be watching in that game is how Kansas City, how well Mahomes is moving around and how Cincinnati defends against them. I think that both games are great matchups this week. I'm maybe a little more interested in seeing, sort of Kansas City, Cincinnati, the rematch, just because it's like a boxing match, and it's like Kansas City's lost the last 3 rounds, and they're the home team, and their crowd's going to be into it, and this is the team that now they can't seem to beat. And then their franchise quarterback is gimpy. So I think that's going to be a really interesting game. If Cincinnati plays like they did last week, they're going to be tough to beat.
I hope that it's not obvious right from the get-go that Mahomes' ankle is going to be an issue. I hope he comes out there looking at least 80% or better, and it's not like obvious that he's limping and, Cincinnati gets a clear advantage right from the jump.
Yeah, I agree with you. It'll be a better game if we don't hear the announcers talk about Patrick Mahomes' ankle at all.
Exactly,
it's an issue and not an excuse, and not the Chiefs have to alter the way they play to try to, hide a weakness. So I agree with you there.
Hey, with Chad Henne having that long drive last week, we'll see. Maybe he'll get back in there, Dave.
Everyone got very excited about the Chad Henne drive. I mean, he threw for 23 yards. I think Pacheco had like one really big run on that drive.
Yeah, he did.
I mean, Henne's fine. He's a capable backup, but if he has to play meaningful minutes on Sunday, then the Chiefs are probably in trouble.
Very true. All right, Dave, we talked a lot about these 4 teams. I'm curious, let's say you're a GM and you have to pick one quarterback and one head coach to start your franchise with or build your franchise around. Which quarterback and coach would you pick?
That's a really tough question for this weekend because I think you could make a case for 3 of the 4 quarterbacks. Look, Brock Purdy has never lost a game, right? So is he one of those 3? No. We just don't know enough about him yet. But you could make a case for the other 3. I mean, Jalen Hurts is like of all these dual threat quarterbacks so far, or certainly this year, he was the most devastating of them.
Yeah.
Even more effective than Josh Allen probably for the season, and certainly made fewer mistakes. But I'm still going with Patrick Mahomes. He's only 27, so it's not like you're getting Russell Wilson, like a guy who is kind of decently into his 30s. Like Mahomes still has prime years ahead of him, and I still think he's the best in the game. Burrow's a close second for me. And the coach I'm going to take Kyle Shanahan. I know his career record is not sensational. And he's had a couple of not so great seasons. but he's in the NFC Championship for the third time in 4 years. His players seem to really like playing for him. Their defense flies all over the place. Their offense just schemes things up and puts, one play Debo's in the backfield and McCaffrey's out wide. Then the next play, like McCaffrey's in the slot and Debo's in the other slot and Elijah Mitchell's in the backfield. And like the defense just doesn't know what's coming. George Kittle pulling this way, then he's pulling that way and pancaking people. And then he's running a 30-yard seam route and catching the ball off his helmet. I really like the way he schemes up a game. I know he hasn't won the big one yet. He's been to one Super Bowl, which they didn't come through. But Andy Reid, look, he has a tremendous resume, but he's 64. So I'm not starting a team with him as my coach. I'm going to go with Mahomes, with Burrow as my backup QB. Can I have them both?
Man, talk about a team.
And I'm going to go with Shanahan. What is your answer?
Maybe this is because I had to deal with the pain of seeing this, and this player kind of reminds me of that player. But I think it'd be really fun to see Jalen Hurts paired with Andy Reid. That would makes me think about Donovan McNabb and Andy Reid in their early days in Philadelphia, and those teams were nasty, man. They put up big numbers, and I believe it was 4 straight NFC Championship games. So those were some good teams, but that was a fun team.
They only won one of them, but you're right. They did. This is Reid's 10th championship game, which is pretty amazing. Yeah. And he's 3-6 in them, but he went to 5 with the Eagles, and this is his 5th with the Chiefs. So, man can coach.
He can.
And the other thing I'll say about Reid is, and I wrote about this in my column this week. Like, if there's one coach, I know I was talking about how creative Shanahan is offensively. Andy Reid is right there, and he's been doing it for longer. I think there's some crazy stat that, like, he's never had an offense that was not in the top half, ranked in the top half. And that includes, like, the year with Alex Smith as his starting quarterback and, some of the years in Philly without McNabb. But if there's one coach that if Mahomes is limited and they have to change the offense a little bit, if there's one coach that can kind of devise ways to hide that weakness and get the most out of other players, it's Andy Reid. And that's why, I mentioned Kadarius Toney before. This is not my bold prediction of the week. I have something else for that. But I think if the Chiefs win this game, I think Kadarius Toney's gonna be part of the reason. I think he's gonna. Yeah. I think they're gonna need him. He's finally healthy. I don't think he was actually hurt on the Giants. I think there was a lot more going on there, but or maybe he was a little bit hurt. I'm talking about this year, but I think Toney is the kind of player that can make a difference. He can make people miss. He can do things in the open field, and I think if the Chiefs win, he's going to be a big part of it. So, talking about if the Chiefs win, it's time for us to make our game predictions for the championship.
Sir.
So we'll start with the first game, which is the NFC game, goes first this week. 3:00 Sunday. The big bad 49ers take their 11-game winning streak into the city of Philadelphia, where they'll play an Eagles team that, with Jalen Hurts at QB, has only lost 1 game this year, and they've only lost 3 total. I think the line is either 2.5 or 1.5. It's less than a field goal. What's your prediction for this one, Paul?
For me, it's Mahomes and Reid get their revenge from last year. Kansas City wins this one.
No, we're talking about the NFC game first.
Oh, I'm sorry, the NFC game. I apologize, Dave. Yeah, Shanahan makes it to the big dance and continues having one of the greatest coaching seasons ever.
All right. My pick for this one is the home team. I think this is going to be the moment where I don't think Purdy's going to be I don't think he's going to be terrible. I don't think he's going to single-handedly cost the 49ers the game or anything like that. But I think this pass rush, the crowd, the moment is going to be a little bit much. And the Eagles looked unstoppable last week. I know that they were not playing the 49ers defense. This is going to be a completely different animal, but I think the Eagles have a little too much for Mr. Purdy. And I think for the second straight year, the 49ers come up just short, lose by 3 or 4 points. You previewed your AFC pick. So do you want to say a little more about it, or just leave it there?
Well, I don't have much more to say about it. I've been going with my gut when I've been doing these predictions, and my gut's been right except for one time. So I'll stick with it. That's really what my gut says, is that this is kind of about revenge, and Mahomes gets his.
Yeah, I could see this game going either way, but for the second time tonight, I'm gonna take the other side. I've been burned too many times picking against this Bengals team. I think that they are. I think Joe Burrow is just a winner. You going back to college, this guy just wins big games. And I think the Bengals are on a major run. The last game they lost was on Halloween night. I think if Mahomes was 100% healthy, I might still take the Bengals. And I think that him possibly being even a little bit compromised is significant. And I just think the Bengals are going to have a little too much for Kansas City. But both games could go either way. But I will. The Super Bowl I am predicting is the Philadelphia Eagles and the Cincinnati Bengals. Meaning we'll get. The Eagles won the Super Bowl 6 years ago, but that's their only Super Bowl win, and the Bengals don't have one. So that would be, essentially two teams with not a lot of Super Bowl history. So that's what I'm predicting. Do you want to move on to the last segment? I'll let you do this one because this is your favorite.
All right, Dave. It's our bold call, championship edition. Dave, what's your bold call of the week?
All right, my bold call is for the second straight week, Brock Purdy does not throw a touchdown pass. And for the second straight week, the 49ers don't break 20 points. And I already told you I don't think they're going to win. I don't know how bold that is, but considering that Purdy threw 2 touchdowns in 7 straight games before last week, and the 49ers scored plenty of points in all those games except for one against the Commanders, that's my bold prediction. What is your bold prediction this week?
All right, Dave. I don't know how you're going to feel about this. I know we're all worried about Patrick Mahomes' ankle, but Kansas City and Cincinnati have a combined score of 80 points.
Wow. That's a lot of points. Okay.
Yeah.
You're telling people out there to bet the over. All right. Well,
do you know what the line is right now? What is the game total?
The game total for both games is right around 46 and a half. I forget which game is which.
Okay.
I think the AFC might have a slightly higher total. It's somewhere in the 46 range.
Okay.
You're predicting almost, a significant number of points above that.
Yeah.
And it could happen. I mean, they're both really good offenses. The last couple games they've played would suggest they're going to score around 50, but we'll see.
Yeah, we'll see. Their defenses have both been playing really well.
Yeah.
Okay, Dave, we're wrapping things up.
Well, these should be, like we said, these are the 4 best teams, and both matchups are. There's a lot of like strength versus strength. Like the Eagles running game against the 49ers running defense, the Chiefs passing game against the Bengals, entire defense. There's a lot of like strength versus strength. Who's gonna win those matchups? Should be interesting.
Definitely. Yeah, Dave. We're wrapping things up here, but before we do, remind the people where they can find you on Twitter and let them know about your content, sir, and where we can find it.
Thanks a lot, Paul. And let me just say, it's been really fun. And I know we got one more one more round of playoffs after this, but it's been really fun breaking down the playoff games with you, both the games that have been played and the ones that are coming up.
Yeah, definitely.
It's fun for me because I write my article and then we talk about it, and sometimes I start to question what I wrote or start to think about it differently because of something you say or something I say. So this has been a good exercise. Anyway, I'm on Twitter at Pigskin Papers. I post all my content, there, but I also have a blog where the articles sit, and that is thepigskinpapers.com. And if you want to check out my championship round preview, that article is posted right now. And Paul, where can people find you on Twitter, and where can they find your content, including your Trust or Bust?
Yes, sir. Guys, you can find my articles there on Twitter, part of the King Fantasy Sports team. I always forget to mention that. So shout out to Rich, the best editor in the game. I apologize about that, Rich. And of course, my Dallas Cowboys podcast, which you can find live on Twitter on either my personal account or on the Across the Cowboys Twitter account. We stream live every Monday around 9-ish. My co-host and I were never on time. We start talking pre-roll, and then we let the clock pass us. So forgive us for that. I won't have a Trust or Bust this week as the playoffs are wrapping up, but I have some ideas for content in the future, so be on the lookout for that. And again, if Cowboys fans are not, we talk a lot about food, and we talk about other things. So any new listeners looking for another show to listen to, we'd appreciate any support you have. And you can find me on Twitter at Paul_Ryan15. We appreciate you joining us, and we'll see you guys next week.
Good night, everyone.